I had to do a shareholder buyback and we were 40k into a 50k overdraft, and that overdraft had a personal guarantee on it. We probably had an average growth rate of about 20% year on year in terms of our revenue. We lost 3 out of 5 of our biggest clients. I think we did very well in terms of new biz, but we probably ended up standing still. I would put that down to staff retention that then led to poor client retention.
Kevin, first thing I'd love to get started on is something I'm really passionate about, and I think everybody is. How are you using AI to perform better as an agency owner right now?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of answers on this, and I think one is how we work with our clients. So there's certainly a lot that our team are doing to improve our workflows of, kind of just how we're dealing with things in terms of efficiencies. So I've mentioned previously in terms of like probably not using it for strategy, but more like the research, the analysis, and being more efficient. And then as an agency owner, I feel like there's so much more I could be doing, and it's something that I'm starting to like push myself a little bit, and just understand where it's useful. Like Perplexity, I've used quite a lot and actually found it's extremely valuable in terms of summarizing information and kind of getting to a point quicker, and then you might want to do some more in-depth research afterwards. So just kind of learning about how to use the tools, I think, in terms of where things are going, of that becoming like an agent, for example. So I think the more that I can use them myself, the more I can understand, okay, well, this is where it's useful today and where things may be heading in the future.
Absolutely. And I think sometimes as well, it's quite overwhelming because it feels like there's a new tool or a new update that comes out every other day right now. And you've got somebody saying, have you used this? I'm like, well, I'm still learning the thing from last week. And it's just a lot.
It is. And even there's certain things I've tried, like I use Superhuman for email, for example, and I know they draft AI replies and stuff like that, and some of it's very good. But equally, at the same time, I'm kind of like, I'm not sure that adds to what I would have done in the prompt initially. And like I say, like that technology will evolve. So being aware of it, I think, is useful. But maybe not all of it is quite ready for or fit for purpose today.
Absolutely. And Kevin, so if we talk a bit about cash flow is obviously critical for agencies, and it's not something that I see talked about a lot on the likes of LinkedIn. So how in your agency career have you dealt with cash flow issues?
Yeah, I actually think that's an interesting point of LinkedIn. I'm in quite a few private groups of people who run not just agencies, but different types of businesses. The conversations happened, behind closed doors. So there's always problems. So sometimes there's companies that just don't survive, but they're not the ones that publicly you necessarily hear about. I've always had very good advisors who have certainly looked at advising me away from stuff like personal guarantees. So in the UK, you might have a personal guarantee on a bank overdraft, for example. And I know we've been in situations. We had a point where I had to do a shareholder buyback, and we were 40k into a 50k overdraft, and that overdraft had a personal guarantee on it. So that's quite scary in the sense of you could see how that could go from a 50k overdraft to a 100k overdraft, etc. And a personal guarantee basically means that they can come and take your house, your mortgage, everything with it. That is actually quite scary. And so from a cash flow perspective, for us, certainly that was kind of quite a low point. From that point, we had an initial target of let's get out of our overdraft. We kept it for a while. To be honest, we might even still, no, I think we've closed it completely now. But basically, the idea is we would then pull clear of that and have a decent amount of savings in the bank. So it gives us a safety net. It also means we don't have to make knee-jerk decisions. So yeah, just being profitable, being self-funded, independent means you have to kind of make a profit in order to survive, essentially, and then try not to stretch yourself too far. If I was going to give one tip, I think this has been mentioned previously on your podcast by other people, but invoice in advance. When I restarted an agency, we used to previously, for the first 5 or 6 years, always invoice at the end of the month for the work that had been delivered. And then you get paid typically 30 days later than that. Quite often that would be late. So you're out of pocket all of the time. And I had advice from someone that was just like, basically that challenging advice of entrepreneurs' reactions are quite often, oh, we do it this way because that's what we've always done, or our clients wouldn't like it if we were to invoice someone in advance. We just tried it and we found very little pushback. And basically, if you're, for example, invoicing 100K a month and you're invoicing that at the end of the month versus the start of the month, that makes a massive impact to your bank balance. So that's probably the one biggest tip I would give if you're not doing that right now.
Awesome. I love it. And you mentioned having a certain amount of months in the bank as like a safety runway. And I
Yeah.
feel like there's such a difference if you're an agency owner and you're constantly in fear looking at that bank account being like, oh, well, again, like we've been promised that this is going to come in the end of the month and then it doesn't. I think there's a big difference in the way that you operate when you're in fear rather than, okay, you've got a certain amount of months ready to go. So what would your guidance be on that for, let's say, somebody that's got a month runway in the bank, right? They're living like month to month. How many months would you recommend somebody to save up for?
I think there's a balance of what you should have, and the luxury end of that problem is you potentially don't want to have too much cash in the sense of, well, actually, it's just sat around making a low interest rate. Maybe you could utilize that better in terms of reinvesting into growth. So that's a nice problem to have at that end of the scale. At the other end of the scale, I think quite often people talk about 3 to 6 months worth of cash. I don't think we necessarily have a hard and fast rule on that, but we know we have bank accounts for our corporation tax, our VAT. So that basically gets squirreled away, if you like, from the point that like end of the month each month. So we're not in a situation where it's like, oh wait, we have to pay X amount, tens of thousands of pounds, and find the money for it. So we know what's coming, and that helps a lot. And equally, there's a safety net that we know there's a almost like a vault, if you like Profit First talks about all of this, where you take money for yourself and look at how you can have that, kind of as a safety net. Like I say, so that you don't have to make those knee-jerk reactions. But equally, I think there is a tipping point where it's, okay, well, what can we do with this cash? How do we use that to leverage that and grow as well?
Awesome. And just one more question sticking on cash then. So let's say experimental expenditure, right? So you guys do your big events in London, and I'm sure that they're great for brand awareness and stuff like that. But let's say earlier on in your career where you were looking at cash maybe a bit more in detail, and you're like, right, well, do we have the leverage to spend on this? Like, we won't necessarily see an ROI within the next 3-6 months. It might be a long-term effect. What's kind of your thought process going through them?
I can tell you what I did, and I'm not sure it's the right answer and what I would do now. Our accountants would probably not be happy. But what I used to do was I'd check our bank balance. If it looked quite good, I'd spend money on what I thought would be the best thing for us to do. And if it looked a bit scary, I would probably not spend that money or wait until we'd reached a certain number in that bank account that made us feel more confident to make that decision. The reason why I say we wouldn't do that now is we'll have accountants who tell us that you might have a bank balance of X, but what you owe right now in terms of the next month or so of your outgoings means that's not your true bank balance, and you can't be making decisions based on whether you're feeling happy about your biggest client just paid you yesterday. That's kind of how I used to do it. And maybe there's a phase of a size of business where you can get away with that. But I think rather than feeling flush and feeling like, okay, I'm going to roll the dice because it's a good day, it's much more about actually business planning. How do you look ahead for the financial year? How do you stay on track against where we are? And then there might be an element of, you've got a stretch target, you're doing very well, you think you can take it further. Maybe that's when you roll the dice, but it's based on a longer term view and forecast.
Awesome. And you've grown your company to very impressive heights. What's been the most expensive lesson you've learned along the way?
Oh, there's loads of them. I think I'm trying to answer this in two ways. One is, you always learn, this sounds like a cliche, but you always learn the most from the failures. But I think sometimes you can look back at the successes as well. And I'm really bad at that myself, but things that have gone well that you can build upon. I think are really important to look at, because it can get missed. And if you're doing something well, you should acknowledge that, you should maintain that and invest in making sure that it continues to work well. And actually, you could probably invest in making that work even better for you. So I think in terms of the most expensive lessons, I think actually maybe not looking at that enough sometimes is an expensive lesson, because sometimes you can just naturally, I think it's quite human to look at the negative and how do you fix it rather than acknowledge the success and build upon it. I think also, I mean, if I was to pick out a couple of highlights, there's been stuff like some of it's personal setbacks. So there's been instances. 2012, I left my first agency, and that was largely due to the fact that my dad had sadly died, and dealing with leaving a company and building a new company at that point in time was my way of probably grieving and dealing with things. But I think quite often it's the unexpected events. You get your COVIDs, your economic crises, stuff that's market conditions, but the personal side, I think, is where that's really hard to continue to run a business when you know you're not 100% and you've got stuff going on. And I think that's kind of quite a struggle, and it's learning to how do you not be too dependent on one person, and that person being the founder yourself, so that you can spin different plates. And equally, no one's 100% 100% of the time. So how do you acknowledge that and actually have those dependencies so that you can work through it?
Awesome. I love that. And yeah, like I'm guilty of that as well. As I always look back at, okay, well, what did we do wrong last month? What could we improve on? What bottlenecks have we got? And I put up a LinkedIn post last week, and I actually got a lot of people message me about it. And it was something like, basically, I looked through, it was a Friday, looked through what had been done on the week, and it was like no big deals done, no big clients signed. And I was like, oh, it's like been a bit of a meh week. But I looked down at my to-do list, and I like ticked off like 22 out of 25 of the things that I needed to get done. And yeah, I think it's just about putting in that the weekly progress and moving forward daily.
Sometimes it is the smaller wins. I remember speaking ages ago to Will Critchlow about this, and he was saying about how you always celebrate the big wins, which is like the contract at the end. Once it's been finally signed, you'll go out for beers and pizza or whatever, and or the awards that you've won and stuff like that. And the reality is that pitch was not won on one day. It was potentially a month, if not multiple months worth of hard graft to get you to that point. And the award was not won on the evening. It was won in the prior year in terms of the work that had gone into that. And those big events will pay off, and it looks like it's this big overnight success. And the reality is you've done the hard work in the build up to get to that point. And sometimes it is those kind of learning curves and failures that lead you to, okay, well, we won't make that mistake next time. And then the next one you win. So it is important to kind of keep that consistency and momentum, but also acknowledge that what you're doing today that might not feel significant, actually in a month's time, that might really pay off.
Absolutely. Awesome. I love that. So Kevin, hypothetically, let's say you, after our episode on this, you're going and you're meeting your strategy team, you're sitting down, and the goal is, right, how do we don't have to double revenue, but how do we smash revenue next year? What kind of strategies are you talking about?
Yeah, so we've actually just done this as an exercise with our leadership team, and it's we've done business plans in the past, and that's evolved over time. And I could certainly go into that in more depth, but the top level of that is the summary is previously I created a business plan, and then we had the team that would execute against that. And again, I think at certain stages that works. You need someone that says, okay, this is where we're going, let's go off and do it. But once we've kind of matured as a business, you don't get that much buy-in as a founder, where it's my plan and everyone else has to do what I say. So what we've done previously, this was just coming out of COVID 2021, we created a business plan as a collaborative effort between myself and the leadership team of, okay, this is where we're going. And how are we going to get there, and let's work on this together as a series of workshops as a team. And what we've done this year is, which is again an evolution of that, is I set the brief. This is what I want us to create as an output. You go away, you create the business plan, and then present it back to me. And we've just gone through that process. And I think that's where, rather than me giving the answers if we should be doing more of X, Y, and Z, and I always have my opinions on those, it's much more interesting to understand actually where do the team see us going and what can they do that helps us to get there. And then they have that belief in being able to execute it. So that's been quite interesting. And like I say, there's always a few different routes. You can do more of the same in terms of what you're doing. You can always make improvements. I quite often like to think about, at the end of each year, if you repeated that year, how would you have done it better? I think that in itself is a useful case. But then equally, where are the gaps? What could you do that you haven't done before? Is there a new market? Is there a new service? What's changing in terms of technology that you need to keep pace with? What do you need to ignore so that you don't get too distracted? Like, all of those things I think are really important. And like I say, as we've grown and scaled, that's become a team effort, not just ideas from one person's head. And yeah, kind of taking that into a much more collaborative approach.
I love that. I love the collaborative approach of the business plan, because most of the agency owners that I talk to, especially around Christmas time, it's normally the time when most of the team are off and you're kind of putting together the business plan, you're putting everything into it. But I love the idea of bringing the team in and involving them in that. Just out of curiosity, was there anything, let's say the year gone past, was there anything that the team brought up that you hadn't thought of and you were like, oh, wow, let's put that into the business plan?
I'm trying to think of specific examples, but it's certainly deeper levels of insight that they will have. I'll have blind spots where I'm not that involved in clients anymore. So they will understand, okay, well, this is the pushback we're getting from clients. These are the areas that we think are opportunities to grow with them. And yeah, certainly other areas that we can see that could be potential risks. I think risk is actually an interesting thing. Everyone tries to think about what can you do that really takes us forward this year? But really, it's kind of, in a lot of respects, how do you protect what you've got that's working really well? And if you can do that, and I know we'll probably come onto this in terms of client retention, but if you can protect what you have, it makes growth so much easier, because then you're adding on top, you're not replacing. So actually thinking sometimes pessimistically, which isn't natural to me, I'm certainly more optimistic, but thinking about how do we stop stuff going wrong so that actually then we can focus on growth being, yeah, kind of added on top of what we're doing, rather than, like I say, replenishing what you already have.
Love that. And yeah, let's get straight into retention then. A lot of agencies, they struggle with the whole leaky bucket syndrome, where new clients come in and existing ones leave. So how have you guys gone and tried to maximize client retention?
I think this is, if I was to say, we've grown steadily over the last few years. So we've probably had an average growth rate of about 20% year on year in terms of our revenue. So certainly not at the exceptional end of agencies, but also certainly quite steady and strong and consistent. And for us, in a tough market more than ever, what we found is that retention has been the driving force behind that. So for us, having long-term clients is key. And you'll always have some churn, and I'd argue you should have some churn. But equally, keeping hold of your best clients, your best people, and being able to kind of grow that way, I think those two work hand in hand. If I was to look at answering the question in a different way, of when we've had problems with client retention, we had a perfect storm probably about 5 years ago of, within a quarter, we lost 3 out of 5 of our biggest clients. And that year was a massive setback. And like I say, I think we did very well in terms of new biz, but we probably ended up standing still. If I was to, and I did reflect on this in terms of why that happened, I would put that down to staff retention that then led to poor client retention. So, and it doesn't happen immediately. And this is why it takes a bit of reflection to figure out, why did we lose that client? And when I looked back at when that client was at its best, there were different people working on that account, and 2 or 3 of those had moved on. And the people that we brought in, I think were good, but probably not quite up to the same standard. And equally, they just didn't have, there's a fast learning curve to get back on track quite quickly with new people that just don't have that brand knowledge. And for me, staff retention, having a strong culture and consistency is something that a good team will keep those clients engaged, happy, and growing. And it's always, for me, it's always about results, but those relationships are really strong as well in order to how you get those results, how you get buy-in. So yeah, I think the two work hand in hand. It's not just, I would be amazed to see an agency that has really strong client retention and poor staff retention. I just think they work together.
Quick pause. If you're getting value from this conversation about scaling agencies and hiring top talent, I want to share something that might help you. Are you struggling to find A players for your digital marketing agency? We've got you covered. For SEO experts who turn rankings into revenue, head to SEOforhire.co. For paid media specialists who boost your bottom line, check out paidmediajobs.com. And if you're looking for foot rubs, you're definitely in the wrong podcast. All right, let's jump back into the episode. Awesome. I love it. And okay, so moving on to hiring then, I've seen the video of you walking through the field, talking about how you went to, was it like a Harvard business meeting? And
That's great. Yeah.
You asked if how does the likes of McKinsey and stuff start when they're a small team? And the answer was hiring great people, right? Tell me if I butchered that story. You probably could tell that a lot.
Hang on. Yeah. So it is a leading professional services course, which I highly recommend, actually. Not many agency owners take this. It's more geared around professional services, legal, financial services, but you're essentially solving the same problems. And it was one of those things that I went into as a bit of a bugbear of, okay, well, you see McKinsey today with billions in revenue and however many staff they have. And it's that sort of thing of, okay, well, it's quite hard to relate to, but actually when you think about it, they started from somewhere. Everyone started from somewhere. What is it that made them so strong? And the answer was they hired the best people. The best people do the best work. They normally have strong relationships and networks, and that attracts the best clients, to the point that price is always something that will be considered, but it's much more about, actually at a certain level, how do you invest in what's the most likely way to achieve your goals and objectives? And the answer quite often is hire the best people. So for them, having a team of great people can deliver great work. And then, yeah, it kind of all snowballs from there. Those clients grow with you. They tell other people about you. And like I say, that turns into your case studies, your award entries, your marketing, like all of it becomes centered around that culture of excellence. And I think if you lose sight of that, and again, I've certainly seen this where a lot of agencies can be guilty of, whether they try to do this or not, but the smoke and mirrors of, on the outside, this looks incredible, but on the inside, the quality of the work just isn't up to standard. I'd much rather it's the other way around, because at that point, the marketing is fixable, but the work and what your clients think about you, that's the most important thing.
Awesome. And hiring, yeah, it's a tricky one. But have you made any hiring decisions that you regret, and what advice could you give that you've learned from that?
I think some of it is you have to make mistakes as much as you don't want to. Sales in an agency is an obvious example. I think every agency probably has to hire at least 3 salespeople before they figure out what it is they really want. And if you look at where the problem is, it's so easy just to pinpoint that on a person. And the reality is it's probably you trying to figure out what you actually need in the first place. I think we've certainly been in that situation. And then I think just knowing the signs of actually what type of people work out for us. What are the green flags? What are the red flags? Having an onboarding process, a probation period, like all of that. Again, you're not going to get 100% right, but you can try and make that percentage as high as possible in terms of having thorough processes that people follow in terms of what we're looking for. And essentially, once you make that decision to hire someone, you want to make them a success. That's why you hire them. So it's trying to invest in them in order to empower them to do that job. So yeah, but I think it's values is really important in terms of understanding how will they fit within your team. It's quite rare that it's people that are bad people or potentially not even good at their job. It's quite often it's more they're just not the right fit for this type of organization. So it could be you might want to hire someone that's been at a slightly bigger agency than yourselves, but maybe you don't need to hire someone that's been at a Google or a Facebook. Maybe that's more difficult to relate to. And I'm not saying that that definitely won't work, but equally it's kind of just trying to understand what works for your type of organization.
Absolutely. And I feel like there's a lot of agencies that we talk to that we'll start working with them and they're like, oh, we want to start looking at, and they'll list these like big agency names. And it's literally just because of the brand of that reputation of the agency. But once you start talking to some of the people in there, it's like they've been chasing this title off that company where they've been doing, recommendations for the last like 2 years, or they haven't been in the trenches of actually working. But there's so many people that will just get like starry-eyed at the actual company name. That's something that we run into quite a lot.
Yeah, and it's a very different role. And I think certainly within digital marketing, you can have job titles that what we call an SEO analyst, for example, might be very different to what a large media agency calls an SEO analyst or a strategist. And again, it's trying to break that down in terms of, okay, the day-to-day role. And it's a two-way interview, right? Is this a good fit for the person? We don't want them to come in and this is a massive shock to them and that's not right for them. That's no good for us. And equally for that, from our side, we want to make sure that they're the right fit, they can do this, and they're motivated ideally for the long term in order to kind of do that role.
Awesome. And Kevin, you mentioned client retention. Well, staff retention helps client retention. So what kind of things have you guys been doing to help with staff retention?
I think there's a few things we've done, but I actually think in a lot of ways if I was to say one thing, it sounds so obvious, but just treat people like adults. It's kind of like just basically make sure, like we're remote as an agency, which I think lends well to this. We're not the type of agency that we're not going to be nitpicky about what's on your screen in the background or something like that in the office because we don't have one. It's purely based on output of work. And I think for us, one trend that we found in attracting good people is working with great brands. So great people want to challenge themselves. They want to work on big accounts. And if we can give that to them, that's appealing. And that's what people want to be able to do in order to feel like they're learning and progressing. I think once you've stopped learning and feeling like you're moving forward, that's not really a good place to be. So obviously giving people those opportunities, giving them a career path, that's all really important, but equally treating them as equals and a level of respect. I think you could probably count on one hand the amount of times I've said my team, for example, it's our team. It's like we're all doing this together. And even if I do say that, I almost just like correct myself as soon as I say it, because I think it's that sort of mentality where it's like we're in this together. We need to basically be able to look at what people are doing and why they're doing it and align those interests as much as possible.
Awesome. I love that. And you mentioned there working with big brands. So I know you guys work with some massive brands like Under Armour, I think Fat Face, and a few other big brands. Yeah. How did you go about attracting your first whale brand?
Okay, there's a story behind this, but I think there's quite a few. It's the whale starts really quite early on. So we started working with quite large businesses in Oxfordshire in the late 2000s. And I'm based in Oxfordshire. So companies that had their UK headquarters. So Miele, the white goods brands, Audley Travel was a brand that we started working with. And that got us a reputation alongside, I was speaking at quite a lot of the big conferences. SMX, Brighton SEO, SES, like those types of events back in the day, alongside writing for the likes of e-consultancy. That built a level of reputation that generated inquiries off the fact that we've got case studies for, like I say, those UK headquartered Oxfordshire brands that then led into inquiries from larger brands. So we won a pitch probably 2010, for example, for Deloitte. We started working with M&G Investments, and then longer term, Expedia, a good example. So my story that I was thinking of previously was when I moved from Oxfordshire to London, the one thing I really missed was playing five-a-side football. I used to do that once a week in Oxford, but it didn't really make sense to commute back to Oxford once I'd moved to London in order to do that. So I set up a league, or not a league, just a kickabout. It was basically, if we can get 8 to 10 people once a week in Camden, I set up a meetup.com. I targeted it to digital marketers in London that just want to play football. And off the back of that, there are quite a few people that I knew already that I kind of invited to kick that off. So we'd play football, we'd go for a beer in Camden afterwards and just have a chat. And I wasn't a big fan of the networking events in the evening, presentations. I feel like I've done a lot of work during the day. I didn't necessarily want what felt like homework in the evening. I'd actually just rather have a run around, get some exercise and enjoy it. And off the back of that, there was someone there that worked at Expedia, and I think I probably badgered him a couple of times about, can we show you what we can do? And eventually he gave in, but they became a really big long-term client for us. And I think, like I say, a lot of it builds up over time. What we were talking about earlier of what you're doing today that might not necessarily feel like a big win is playing football on a Wednesday night with someone that then becomes your biggest client. On the Wednesday, that doesn't feel like that's significant, but 5 years later, when a very large percentage of your billings has come through that brand, it does. So yeah, I think there's all sorts of things like that. And like I say, we can talk in terms of how that's evolved, what that looks like in terms of positioning, how to craft what you want next. But yeah, I think there's a number of gears that you have to go through to get to that point.
I love that story, by the way. That's one of the best stories I've heard about attracting big brands. I wasn't expecting that.
I think there's a lot in not looking for something. I think if you're trying to push too heavily, then I don't think it works. Whereas if you're actually just giving value or maybe even just doing something where you enjoy yourself, then I think people are much more likely to trust you and give you an opportunity.
Awesome. I love it. And Kevin, am I right in saying that you started the agency early 20s?
Yeah, I originally went freelance in 2003, and then started an agency in 2006. So I was 24, I guess. Yeah.
Okay, so 24 to now, how has your leadership style changed?
Oh, massively. I think in the early days, I was literally a student out of uni trying to figure out what can I do and what do I enjoy. And it was certainly a case of, I come from a computing development and then a business-based degree. I didn't enjoy the technical web development side. I tried that. I did a placement year doing that and actually found that what I was much more interested in was the SEO side, like the marketing and like this is very early days of 2003. Like Google was 98. But that was kind of pure curiosity of figuring out what works and then being able to try it out on a few test affiliate sites and then being able to sell it as a service, as a consultant, and then later an agency. Yeah, based on, like I say, curiosity more than anything. And also back then a lack of budget where I would do every role going from doing the work to selling the work to keeping the client happy to if I had to deal with finance or whatever, there wouldn't be a bookkeeper or a financial director. So I think you've just got to do all of those different roles and roll your sleeves up at that stage. And I think if I fast track to today, we're now in a position where we have a senior leadership team. We have people in those key areas of the business, and they can help to push that forward. So now it's much more about how do I become the coach rather than the star player, if you like? How do I make sure that I've probably done all of those roles in different phases across the growth of the agency, some good, some bad, but there's always experience to share. And equally, you need to let people put their own spin on it, learn some mistakes sometimes. So I think it's now a role of how do I empower, coach, and equally sometimes stay out of the way so that we can work together as a team.
Awesome. And Kevin, what's been the hardest skill or knowledge area that you've had to master as an agency owner?
Finance, I think. I've been lucky in the sense of, and again, we can talk about this, of we've had, so Liz in our team is our COO, and she joined us 7 or 8 years ago in an HR role. I've been very lucky in the sense of she's taken away a lot of the people side. So I think a common agency owner answer would be managing stuff that you're just not trained for and you didn't get into this for managing people and dealing with essentially people problems. Liz has been very good at not just managing people problems, but preventing them, understanding actually what could cause them in the first place and stopping that from happening so that then it's not a game of damage limitation. So I think that's actually helped a lot in terms of the culture of the team that has allowed me to focus probably more on the growth side. But there was certainly a growing up period in terms of finance. And I've already mentioned being 40k into a 50k overdraft with a personal guarantee. Stuff like that happens because you make decisions, like I mentioned, of we've got a decent bank balance today, let's go out and spend some money. And then there was an evolution of kind of just hard, cold facts of you won't have a business if you carry on like this because your cash flow forecast is going downwards. And if that continues, then you're just not going to be able to operate as a company. So there's a level of growing up where you can then see, okay, well, what's our forecast? How much are we going to bring in? What should we be spending? How do we invest to grow? That I think you have to do to reach a certain level as an agency. And again, like for me, I'm not a financial director and we still need to surround ourselves with people who are very good at the numbers, but being financially savvy around how to be an operator of a business, I think is essential. You can't just trust and outsource all of that to a finance person. You have to understand it yourself because it's your business. And if it fails, ultimately it's your fault. So it's kind of, how do you understand that? Because if you don't, then like I say, you might get through the early stages, but there'll be things like, as you grow quite often, you will win bigger contracts. It sounds great. You're getting more money in, but they might be on 60-day terms and they might be invoices that are in arrears rather than upfront. And if you want to be able to serve certain types of businesses, that might leave you with less cash in the bank rather than more on a short-term basis. So being able to plan and see ahead and understand all of those metrics, certainly in terms of the big KPIs of how to run the business, is essential.
Awesome. I love that. And if we stick to the money once again, so this is a question I've been asked a lot recently, so I'm really keen to hear your thoughts on this. So when it comes to pricing agency services, what approach do you have, especially now as AI tools potentially change delivery efficiency? Should that change in pricing? Like what's your approach to that?
I think ours is a bit of a hybrid. I'm not the biggest fan of the hourly rate, probably for some of the reasons we've mentioned of what our SEO strategist is typically someone with 10 years plus experience within search. What someone else's SEO strategist is might not be that. So it's not comparing apples for apples in terms of if you're a client trying to compare a day rate of what our staff are delivering versus someone else, then straight away there's probably a discrepancy behind the level of experience, the level of salary and everything else in terms of what you're paying for and what you're getting. And ultimately, I don't think it matters. I think it's about the outcome. It's about the result that you can drive for that client. So for us, it's not pure value-based pricing, but I think there's an element of rate card and value-based pricing. So what will you get as deliverables that you can expect to see at certain milestones against your budget, but equally and crucially, what do you expect that performance to look like as a KPI? And that obviously you can't put that down to the letter in terms of we're going to generate you 27% increase in revenue, and this is the exact number that you will expect to see 12 months from today. But you can have a range and a target so that a client can understand, okay, well, it's an investment in growth. What's that potential return from what you're spending? And then that helps you to understand, actually, is that a worthwhile investment? How does that compare to other options? What would that look like if I spent more money? And yeah, then kind of, like I say, there's a deliverable element for that. AI, I think, is an interesting component, but again, that's empowering you as a team to get more out of what you're doing in terms of driving efficiencies and results. And I also think there's sometimes a more grown-up conversation between a client and agency of the agency should make profit from this. Some are very much like, let's take all of the profit out of the agency so that they can basically reduce their spend and maximize the return. That doesn't set you up for long-term success. The agency should be making profit out of it. The client should be probably making sure they're not making too much profit out of that. But equally, I think it's an investment in how do you both grow together? How do you make this a sustainable long-term agreements? That means as an agency, you want to put your best people on that account. You want to grow with them over time. You want to be able to say that they're still a client in 5 years' time. All of that, I think, is really important. And a lot of that does stem back to pricing it right in the first place. Because if you get the first contract wrong, it's really hard to unpick it and say, actually, we need to change things substantially. By that point, it just looks like you don't know what you're doing. So yeah, pricing's a important topic for sure, and it's something that needs a lot of attention in terms of making sure you get it right.
Awesome. I love it. And Kevin, my last question for you is agency owners that might be going through a tough time right now with the whole economy. What kind of advice would you give to them?
My honest advice is to try and ignore as much as you possibly can and focus on what you can control. I think I've been there myself, but you can get into a situation where it's like, if you read the news is always negative. It's kind of everything's, I mean, right now, for sure, if you look at the stock market, it's only going in one direction. But does that necessarily mean that brands are going to completely stop spending their budget? I think the only real event like that has probably been COVID. And even then, you'll get certain categories and sectors that might invest more than they would have previously. Very few, I think, would. I mean, there's certainly quite a lot in that situation where they would have maybe paused budgets, but over the 12 months, I think there'd be very few that have completely frozen spend. So there's always budget out there. It might be limited. My view has always been internally as a company that basically average agencies in a tough market will decline, because that's what averages are. The average stock in a declining market will decline. If you're at the elite level, I think you should at least maintain what you've done in a previous year. And that's easier said than done. And sometimes there's these black swan style events of like you lose your biggest client or maybe a couple of big clients that just mean that turnaround's kind of just not possible. So I don't want to be patronizing about it, but equally for us, one of our values is realistic optimism. It's making sure that we look at things through a lens of how do we achieve what we want to achieve with a dose of realism of, okay, well, how do we get to that point? But it's trying to use that value in a way where we correct ourselves and call each other out if it's more pessimistic, if it's, oh, yeah, the sky is falling, we can't do this, we can't do that. It's, okay, well, let's challenge ourselves. If we applied realistic optimism to that, what do we need to do to turn the situation around? And again, you still might have different scenarios. If that doesn't work out, you may need to make tough decisions within a certain time frame. But I do think it's trying to ignore sometimes what's going on around you and focusing on how do you double down on that client retention? How do you double down and invest in marketing at a time where it might not pay off immediately? How do you then, like I say, don't stretch yourself too far if you're not in a position to do that. But equally, don't just accept a mediocre result just because that's what you're seeing happen around you.
Awesome. I love it. Well, look, Kevin, thank you so much for coming on. I know there's going to be people that have listened to this and found so much value, so they're going to want to follow you along on the journey. Where can they find you?
I think LinkedIn's certainly where I'm most active. So yeah, feel free to connect with me on there, and yeah, always happy to engage with people.
Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed that video and got some kind of value from it. If you did, please make sure to leave a comment in the comment section and let me know any feedback that you have for future videos. And of course, hit that subscribe button because we will be releasing videos every single week. So you're going to want to stick around. Thank you and see you in the next one.